All across New England, hidden within the forests of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, stand aging barns. Beneath them, sunk into the earth, are foundational stones of granite so immense that anyone standing beside them is left baffled by the most basic question: how were they ever moved here? These aren't the neatly cut blocks from a modern construction site, the kind a crane hoists into place with ease. These are raw boulders, weighing several tons each, roughly hewn into shape and set into a barn's base by men who had no access to cranes, trucks, or engines. Only oxen, a lever, and the frozen ground of winter. And this isn't an isolated case, it's repeated thousands of times across all 6 states, with nearly every barn resting on the same improbable stones. Alongside these foundations, built by the very same hands, stretch the stone walls. The total mileage of these walls is almost inconceivable. Laid end to end, they would circle the entire planet multiple times over. Here's the detail that should give you pause, and it's not just me reflecting with hindsight. In 1850, these foundations were still new and their builders still alive. Henry David Thoreau walked these same barriers and penned a thought in his journal that haunted him. Why are never prepared to believe that our ancestors lifted large stones or built thick walls. He marveled at how the work could be so enduring and visible, while the workers themselves were so fleeting. Encountering a stone in a wall that must have required many yoke of oxen to shift, he was struck with awe, as it spoke of an energy and force for which there was no remaining record. Who exactly placed these stones? How did an ordinary farmer, armed with an ox and a lever, manage to position a boulder that we would need a crane to lift today? Why do we know next to nothing about the people who created the most permanent features of this entire region? To grasp the true scale of this, you must understand that New England isn't simply a place with some stone walls. In many areas, it's a landscape constructed almost entirely by hand out of stone. We've become so accustomed to it that we no longer truly see it. Wander into almost any patch of second-growth forest in the region, woods that appear wild and untouched, and within minutes you'll stumble upon a stone wall, another, and another, running straight through the trees where no field has existed for 150 years. These are the skeletal remains of a lost farming world, agricultural society that rose, flourished, and fell, leaving only its stonework behind. Surveyors have attempted to calculate the total. The figures are staggering. Some estimates put the length of stone walls built across New England at well over 250,000 miles, enough to reach the moon and most of the way back. This isn't hyperbole. It represents more stone moved by human hands than was used in the Great Pyramid, more than in all the cathedrals of Europe combined, accomplished not by an empire with slaves and engineers, but by scattered family farmers, one rock at a time, over a few generations. And the walls are only the visible part. Under every house and barn lies a foundation of the heaviest stones, the ones too large for the walls, saved for the structures that needed to endure. This brings us to a question that the romanticized image of the hardy pioneer never quite answers. Did the strength come from to achieve all of this? And why did that strength vanish so completely? Let me be clear, because this story doesn't need exaggeration. Going to pretend moving a multi-ton stone without machinery is impossible. People did it for millennia. The New England farmer accomplished it with a specific and clever set of tools, and understanding them only makes the achievement more impressive. The crucial point was never to lift, but to skid. A farmer would construct a stone boat, a low sled of thick oak planks without wheels. Using a lever and a fulcrum, he'd pry a boulder up just enough to slide it onto the sled. Then the oxen, slow and immensely strong, would drag the whole thing across the ground, as dragging requires a fraction of the force needed for lifting. Timing was also critical. The farmer would wait for winter. The ground was frozen and the snow was packed, because a stone boat glides over frozen earth and ice in a way it never could over summer mud. They were not quick, and a yoke of oxen might move a single large stone in a day, but they were persistent and they had generations. So no, it wasn't magic. It was lever, sled, ox, ice, and a level of patient labor that the modern mind truly struggles to comprehend. Yet this is precisely where the real mystery begins. Knowing how it was physically possible doesn't address what Thoreau couldn't get past. This is the part worth dwelling on, as it's the heart of the matter. It came from a man witnessing it firsthand. Thoreau wasn't a fringe theorist grasping for a lost civilization. He was the most meticulous observer New England produced in that century. A man who measured ponds by hand and counted tree rings for pleasure. He knew exactly how the walls were built, by whom, and with what tools. Yet, standing before a single large stone in a bank wall, stopped cold. Not by the question of how it was moved, but by the chasm between the immensity of the work and the scantiness of the memory left behind. How can their work be so visible and permanent? He asked. How themselves so transient? Contemplate his meaning. The work is everywhere, indestructible, monumental. The workers are gone without a trace. No names, no monuments, no records of who lifted what. The energy and force that amazed him had no memorial. That's the unsettling truth. The easy answer never satisfies. We can explain the lever, the ox, and the ice all day long. What we cannot do is name the man who set the great stone beneath your barn, or tell you anything about him, even though his work will outlast nearly every building constructed in America in the last half-century. The stone is permanent, the person is erased. And the more of New England you traverse, the more complete that erasure becomes. There's a category of New England stone that tests even the patient, labor explanation to its limits, and once you've encountered it, the foundations take on a different light. Scattered across the region are glacial erratics, boulders transported and dropped by ice sheets. Some are so enormous they defy any human handling. The most famous is the Madison boulder in New Hampshire, a single granite block 83 feet long, 23 feet high, weighing roughly 5,000 tons. No one moved that one, the glacier did. But it sets a scale in your mind, because between the field cobble a man could lift and the 5,000-ton monster, there's a whole range of stones. 10, 20, 40 tons that sit in New England's walls, foundations and gate posts, pushing the absolute limits of what oxen, levers, and ice could achieve, sometimes seemingly surpassing them. The standard explanation is that farmers built around the largest ones or split them in place, and often that's exactly what they did. You can find split boulders with drill marks still visible, but not always. There are foundation stones and massive gate posts whose location and orientation are genuinely difficult to account for with a sled and an ox team. Those who set them left no explanation. They simply did it, died, and the stone remained. This repeated silence across the landscape is where a different, older kind of question begins to creep in. Stepping back from the colonial farms reveals something that complicates the neat narrative, because not all of New England's stonework fits tidily into the family farmer era. There are stone structures across the region that sit uncomfortably in the timeline. Chambers built of massive slabs, roofed with capstones weighing tens of tons, standing stones and walls of a scale and construction that some researchers argue don't match ordinary field clearing. The mainstream view is that these are colonial root cellars, animal pens, and property walls built by the same farmers, and for many that's almost certainly true. I'm not going to claim a lost civilization built the chambers of New England. The evidence is thin, and the cost of believing thin evidence is high. The honest position is more unsettling than either extreme. It's this across this entire region. People moved and set staggering amounts of heavy stone in structures, large and small, over a span of time we've only partly mapped. The record of who did the heaviest work and exactly when and how is riddled with gaps. Some of those gaps the colonial farmer fills perfectly. Some he fills only if you don't look too closely. And the deeper you go into the woods, away from the dated farmhouse and toward the anonymous chamber under the leaves, the more the firm answers soften into guesses. The stones are certain, the builders are a fog. There's a reason the people who built all this disappeared from the record, and it's not a conspiracy. It's quieter and harder to argue with. These men were the least documented people in their own society, farmers, hired hands, and in the early years, in some places enslaved and indentured laborers. Their names weren't considered worth recording beside the work of their hands. No one kept a ledger of who set which foundation stone because at the time, unremarkable. It was just Tuesday, the most ordinary labor in the world, done by the most ordinary people. Ordinary people doing ordinary work are exactly who history forgets first. So the wall outlived the wall builder's name by design, not by accident. The farms themselves died. In the 19th century, when the deep, stone, free soil of the Midwest opened up, and the railroads could carry its grain east more cheaply than a rocky New England hillside could grow it, the farmers walked away. They abandoned fields by the hundreds of thousands of acres. The forest returned, swallowing the walls, the cellar holes, and the barns whole. Within a couple of generations, the people were gone. The farms were forest again. All that remained was the stone, the most permanent thing they ever made. Now they're only memorial, with no name carved upon it anywhere. This is the quiet weight underlying the whole story. It's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. Walk into the New England woods today. You are walking through the largest unmarked monument in North America. Every wall is a record of a back that bent to lift it. Every foundation stone beneath a collapsing barn is the work of a specific person on a specific freezing morning with a specific yoke of oxen straining against a specific frozen rope. We cannot name a single one of them. Thoreau felt this in 1850, when the memory was only beginning to fade, and he was already astonished by how completely the makers had vanished behind the made. A century and a half later, the erasure is nearly total. We've turned the whole thing into scenery. The charming old stone wall, the rustic barn foundation, a backdrop for autumn photographs. In doing so, perform the final act of forgetting by making the monument invisible, deciding it's merely pretty. But the stones don't care what we've decided. They sit exactly where they were placed, holding the weight they were set to hold, outlasting the barns above them, the forests that grew over the fields, every memory of the hands that moved them. They are the most honest history in the region, and the one almost nobody reads. That raises one final question. The pretty picture is designed to keep you from asking. So here's what we're actually left holding, stripped down to the plain facts, because the plain version is heavy enough on its own. Across New England, beneath thousands of old barns and houses, sit granite foundation stones weighing many tons, each set in place by hand using only levers, sleds, oxen, and winter ice. Alongside them run hundreds of thousands of miles of stone wall, more stone moved by hand than went into the pyramids, built mostly between the 1770s and the 1830s by ordinary farmers and laborers whose names were never written down. The farms were abandoned in the 1800s, the forest reclaimed them. The people vanished so completely that even Thoreau, walking among them in 1850, couldn't believe how transient the makers were compared to the permanence of their work. Those are the facts, and they aren't in dispute. What sits inside them is the thing that stays with you. We live on top of an enormous, deliberate, back-breaking achievement scattered through the woods around us. Can't name a single person who accomplished it. Most of us have stopped even seeing it. Maybe that's simply how history treats the poor and the ordinary, grinding their work into anonymous scenery. That's the likely answer, and it's probably true. Stand alone in the New England woods, beside a foundation stone the size of a car, set there by hands we'll never name, holding up a barn that collapsed a century ago, and try to accept that nobody thought it worth writing down who did it. The stones are still there, still holding. The people who set them are gone, exactly as Thoreau feared, leaving no memorial but the impossible weight itself. If the largest unmarked monument on the continent, hiding in plain sight in the woods, is the kind of thing the official story would rather you keep mistaking for scenery, then you already know what to do before you scroll away.